The term Barbenheimer has become so prevalent that it now has its own Wikipedia page. For those of you who have managed to evade this new online phenomenon, Barbenheimer refers to the somewhat ironic fact that the films Oppenheimer and Barbie both had the same release date. Thus, despite the respective films' obvious differences, or rather, in fact, because of these differences, the juxtaposition of the two films in concert with one another somehow merits attention for the movie-going public. For example, some have planned to see the two movies on the same day, a double feature, as it were. The ongoing debate of which film to see first is outside the scope of this video essay. The Renaissance had Da Vinci, we have this. Cinema has truly peaked, folks. This is one case where terms from the cursed milieu of corporate speak actually apply. Synergy is one such term. Synergy can be defined as the interaction or cooperation giving rise to a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's the magic that happens when two things come together, and somehow it's more powerful than when they were separate. The unexpected synergy between these two films, stemming from the sheer randomness of their parallel release, mirrors certain intersections in our cultural fabric. This is, of course, despite the fact that these two films were made by different studios. There's no apparent incentive to work together in this case. Yet, here we are, living in a world where a toy doll and a historical scientist accidentally become the dynamic duo we never knew we needed. So this would appear to be a case of incidental synergy, all based on the mere fact that these two movies just so happen to have the same premiere date. Corporate buzzwords aside, it also just so happens that the two films share similar themes despite possessing almost humorously disparate subjects. Both films, despite their overt differences, touch on themes of identity, struggle, and broader societal reflections. Interestingly, both Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan have been cited as success stories in the film industry. They were both indie darlings who went on to make blockbuster mainstream films. Of course, this metric for success has more to do with monetary gain than artistic merit. But this dichotomy, this tension between financial interest and artistic subversion, is actually the perfect lens through which we might glean some broader truth when it comes to the pairing of Barbie and Oppenheimer. It's a fine pairing, sort of like, Walmart and Applebees. It just so happens that these films complement one another insofar as they are both constrained in a rather telling manner by the dominant ideological mode of our time. In part, this phenomenon, Barbenheimer, can be attributed to a collective yearning on the part of the movie-going public for original films that do not fit into some larger cinematic universe, that do not, for that matter, constitute any part of an existing cinematic continuum, future plans on the part of Mattel aside. Neither Barbie nor Oppenheimer are sequels, reboots, remakes, and so on. It would appear that Tom Cruise's efforts to bring back cinema have come to fruition, though the fact that these two movies have totally eclipsed the new Mission Impossible is perhaps not something he's happy about. But maybe he should be happy the spotlight's back on movies and not on, poor TV settings.
To that end, we'd like a moment of your time to talk to you about video interpolation.
The movies are back. This is the dawning of a new age, the age of film heads. Or is it? Mike and Jay at Red Letter Media posit that Oppenheimer is the last movie. For those of you who can't infer, I am capitalizing the term last movie in my script because I am insufferable. The tragic cadence of this assertion notwithstanding, it is wholly unclear whether Oppenheimer is the start of a new trend, the cinematic resurgence of original screenplays, or if, as the pessimistic Mike argues, it is the end of cinema as we know it. Is Oppenheimer the ultimate weapon against Marvel? Or is it the death rattle of originality in cinema? Only time will tell. It's probably unfair to hinge one's desires with respect to the fate of cinema itself to one film. You've got your work cut out for you, Christopher Nolan. If Oppenheimer is the last movie, what does that make Barbie? Barbie has stirred a multitude of reactions. Some have argued we shouldn't take the film seriously. After all, it's about a children's toy. It's just a kid's movie, right? But here's a thought to ponder. Barbie was not strictly made for children. It was very carefully designed and marketed to have mass appeal. For kids, the movie is a brightly colored affair with fun little musical numbers and entertaining sight gags. For adults, the movie has a certain nostalgic appeal. It's no wonder the film has been so successful at the box office. Barbie has always been more than just a toy. She's a cultural icon, a reflection of societal norms and aspirations over decades. When we critique its film adaptation, we're not just dissecting a children's movie, but rather a cultural phenomenon with deep-seated ideological implications. It's entirely valid to appreciate the movie for its entertainment value, while also delving into its subtext. Imagine going to a museum and trying to figure out if a painting is genius or just someone who spilled paint. That's the kind of analysis Barbie merits. It's not a battle of wits to determine who's the most enlightened. It's recognizing that movies, even ones based on plastic dolls, can be reflective of our societal values. Rather than getting defensive, I think we should embrace the multi-layered conversations that films can ignite. So put on your thinking cap, or tiara in this case, and let's dive into the technicolor waters of cinema and culture.
Barbie, the teenage fashion model, and it's a special occasion.
I might argue that Barbie is the perfect commercial for the postmodern age because it's a commercial that is decidedly not a commercial, if that makes sense. It's a commercial artfully disguised as a feature-length film, and not to mention directed by a critically acclaimed director to boot. But Barbie, while adorned with intellectualism, can't seem to escape its corporate shackles. And this isn't a novel trend. Brands have a history of co-opting critiques to bolster their image, turning once subversive narratives into marketing tools. Barbie is the logical result of marketing trends that began sometime towards the turn of the 20th century, with women being sold cigarettes under the banner of liberation, a trend that culminated in the early 90s with self-aware commercials that dutifully telegraphed to the audience that, in fact, yes, this is a commercial, and commercials are lame, but we're acknowledging it, so we're cool. It was a shift away from traditional marketing. Let's compare our product to the competitors and show you how ours is superior. Instead, now you have to sell the public a lifestyle. Not just a lifestyle, but an identity. One that just so happens to be tied in some inextricable way to the thing that you're selling. Barbie isn't just a doll or a movie, she's a testament to how far we've come, or fallen, depending on how you see it, in blending consumerism with our quest for meaning. It's like blending Shakespeare with QVC. Maybe that's just peak 21st century culture for you, in a nutshell right there. Describing Barbie as the song of a bird that has grown to love its cage might sound like an overcooked metaphor that your high school English teacher would proudly hang on their classroom wall. But let's unpack it. Barbie is painfully self-aware and hypercritical, yet at the same time, it is nonetheless subject to the confines of a film sanctioned by Mattel, a company that in the past has been highly protective of its brand identity, specifically in relation to Barbie. Mattel once sued the band Aqua over a dispute related to their song Barbie Girl. Mattel argued that the song infringed on its trademark and besmirched the good, upstanding name of its product. In essence, the insinuation that Barbie might be, into partying was objectionable to Mattel. Flash forward a few decades and wouldn't you know it, Aqua's song has been sampled for a song in the new movie. This fascinating turnaround showcases the dance between critique, satire, and commercialism. It's a prime example of how brands can incorporate and co-opt works that were initially meant to critique or satirize their product and turn those works into components of a broader marketing effort. Barbie is an interesting case of a film that possesses the veneer of savvy feminist intellectualism, what with its admittedly on-point critique of toxic masculinity, as well as its ostensibly existential themes. At face value, one might mistake this work for an incisive, satirical masterpiece. But in terms of its actual content, the film is not quite as subversive as one might think, based merely on its ability to set off certain small-statured conservative commentators. The film is considerably hampered in some respects by virtue of the fact that its existence has been explicitly sanctioned by a multinational toy company. How far can you really push it when Mattel is standing over your shoulder? It should come as no surprise that when we discuss the film's more obvious flaws, of particular note is the work's general depiction of Mattel. While the film might sparkle with seemingly profound insights, don't be entirely dazzled. When it comes to critiquing the big toy giant itself, the film's teeth aren't quite as sharp as they appear. Of course, it would be completely asinine to expect a Barbie movie to contain some kind of scathing criticism of the company that sells Barbie products, much less the toy industry writ large. But the precise way in which the film obviates this glaring tension says quite a bit about the present state of, well, I guess you could say the liberal predisposition of our contemporary moment. To put it bluntly, the film pretends to be radical, while in fact, its underlying content aligns quite nicely with the status quo. Mattel is depicted as a hapless yet totally innocuous corporate entity. It's no coincidence that Will Ferrell was chosen to represent its figurehead. His oafish demeanor highlights a critically significant point for the purposes of this analysis. Mattel is not a threat in this film. They're simply an annoyance. Thus, it would seem that this supposedly feminist blockbuster is actually a step back from so many less subtle films, particularly a litany of movies in the 90s, which, at the very least, espouse a healthy sense of anti-corporatism. Free Willy is easily a more subversive work. While Barbie might be grappling with her place in the modern world, sandwiched between nostalgia and contemporary critique, there's another cinematic behemoth that's attempting to navigate its own complex waters.
History turns its most ominous page far out in mid-Pacific, where in the Enewetak Atoll, the world's most awesome weapon is readied for detonation.
As we shift our gaze from plastic to plutonium, we have to ask, does Christopher Nolan's portrayal of Oppenheimer pack the same explosive punch as the atomic bomb, or is it just a dud? I'll see myself out. It's a tall order to step into the shoes of a historical figure, especially one as pivotal and enigmatic as Oppenheimer. Is Nolan's depiction of the man a mere echo of his superhero cinematic style, or a genuine attempt to delve into Oppenheimer's psyche? I personally found the film's treatment of the Bhagavad Gita moment egregiously heavy-handed, making it nearly impossible to detach the portrayal from Nolan's more theatrical efforts, such as the Dark Knight trilogy. And hey, let's shoehorn Einstein into the picture while we're at it. People know Einstein, right? It's just like when Falcon made a cameo in Ant-Man. Let's also not forget that scene where Oppenheimer is suiting up. We might as well give him a utility belt while we're at it. It would seem that blockbuster superhero movies really are in Nolan's wheelhouse more so than historical biopics. Whenever Nolan ventures too far outside of that terrain, he often ends up relying on these same tired superhero tropes. The real sin is that, more often than not, Nolan paints a relatively simplified picture, a stark reduction of the complex ideological battles of the time. Beneath the facade of atomic age gravitas, Nolan's depiction of Oppenheimer is encumbered by the ingratiating need to appease mainstream sensibilities. Despite its artistic veneer and bold thematic undertones, Oppenheimer feels trapped within certain ideological confines, much in the way that Barbie operates under the weight of corporate oversight. The term closure in the context of ideology, and more generally in literary and cultural studies, refers to a process by which certain narratives suppress contradictions or contestations to present a unified, seemingly coherent viewpoint or story. This closure can work to legitimize certain power structures, marginalize dissenting voices, and stabilize dominant ideologies. In the case of both Oppenheimer and Barbie, ideological closure prevents a more daring film from being made. Both films, in their own respective ways, underline a recurring issue with contemporary cinema. a tension between the desire to comment on complex social and political realities and the restrictive constraints of commercial pressures. The film's delivery of historical events, particularly Oppenheimer's development of the atomic bomb, has stirred a hotbed of contention among some of the more discerning viewers. In particular, there's quite a bit of discussion surrounding the ideological disposition of this film. For example, Sean, Master of Wagons, says, "The politics of Oppenheimer, the film, are so funny to me. At a time when so many modern filmmakers pay lip service to leftist causes while making art that's actually quite regressive, Nolan of all people made the most left-leaning major American movie in years, Avatars aside." Another user chimes in, saying, "A left-leaning film would explicitly characterize the bombings as a war crime. What do we make of this discourse?" While I totally reject the idea that Oppenheimer is left-leaning in anything but the broadest possible terms, the notion that the movie needs to explicitly characterize the bombings as a war crime in order for it to be considered sufficiently left is also dubious in this context. In some sense, it's just movies being movies and the internet being the internet, but perhaps it would be fair to say that the expectations we impose on cinema really say more about our collective desire to surpass the narrow imaginative horizons of our time. In all likelihood, the 2024 election will feature two geriatric candidates with historically low approval ratings. Saying that the political climate now is dismal is kind of like saying the Titanic had a slight iceberg problem. And this is especially poignant in relation to the film's subject matter. The world is once again in a state of multipolarity, with various alliances and blocs forming in a new geopolitical alignment. While the US remains the most powerful pole, as it were, it's clear enough that the potential for large-scale conflict amongst the powers is discernibly greater than, say, 10 years ago. Needless to say, the possibility of nuclear disarmament is basically unthinkable at this time. So that is the context in which Oppenheimer presents its somewhat bland statement. I don't really fault radically inclined viewers for reading into it a bit much. We've essentially been starved of anything even remotely subversive in mainstream cinema since perhaps Joker. While I certainly don't think a film needs to conform to my specific worldview in order for it to have artistic merit, the real problem with Oppenheimer is that it fails to put forward anything aside from banal truisms about the atomic bomb. There's a rich history of ideological conflict in the United States, a vast world of differences brought on by class conflict over the course of history. Countless Hollywood films have a tendency to oversimplify the blacklist era, often portraying it merely as right-wingers oppressing liberals. Such narratives miss a critical opportunity to delve deeper into the actual ideologies being persecuted and the nuanced political undercurrents of the time. Nolan doesn't seem very interested in the socialist movement that was happening at that time. He completely glosses over this history, all the while presenting the film almost as a kind of statement piece. But what is the statement, really? To me, it seems to be, look at this important historical figure and the immense weight of his creation. But the film stops just short of taking a substantive stance on any of the surrounding issues. Nolan is kind of like Oppenheimer in that way, a fence-sitter. Oppenheimer's early commitment to the scientific enterprise is met with the devastating realization of the bomb's implications. This opposition could serve as a potent thematic contradiction, driving deeper into the interplay of ideology, personal responsibility, and historical circumstance. But Nolan fails to transcend the narrow binary of enthusiasm and guilt, leaving a richer thematic exploration relatively untapped. In essence, while Oppenheimer reaches for a nuanced dialectical movement, it frequently stumbles, often settling for a more surface-level moral dichotomy instead of plumbing the rich depths of its historical content. The profound implications of the atomic bomb, from the intricate politics of its development, to the moral weight of its deployment, to the subsequent geopolitical chess game of the Cold War, this all gets reduced to what feels like mere set pieces, a backdrop for Oppenheimer's personal journey. And while personal narratives can be a compelling lens through which to view history, they also run the risk of overshadowing a larger, more complex story at play. Nolan, in trying to make a grand statement, unfortunately ends up saying very little that's new or thought-provoking about the atomic age. We're left with a film that, though technically impressive and emotionally resonant at times, ultimately avoids grappling with the deeper ideological battles of its historical context. The film's reticence to delve into the ideological waters of the era means that, for all its spectacle, Oppenheimer can't fully realize its potential as a meditation on one of the most pivotal periods in modern history. If you want to watch a film that does more with less, check out the BBC docudrama Threads. So, dear cinephile, next time you're lost between the aisles of critical theory and pop culture, remember the age of Barbenheimer. More than just a quirky term, Barbenheimer is a reflection of our times, a moment when cinema straddles the past and future, grappling with its own identity amidst changing times. As viewers, the question is, where do we fit into this narrative? That's all the time we have for today. Thank you folks for joining me on this cinematic journey. If you are inclined, maybe consider supporting me on a monthly basis at patreon.com/Nightmare Masterclass. Bye.